I've always enjoyed camping, especially in isolated places far away from the noise and chaos of the city. That weekend, my friend Jake and I decided to explore a hidden lake he'd heard about in a hiking group. It was an obscure spot, perfect for anyone wanting to escape everything. We left early on Saturday, our backpacks packed with supplies and that typical excitement of people who don't know what's ahead. The plan was simple: hike to the lake, set up camp, and spend 2 days enjoying the peace and nature. But halfway there, something started to feel off. I can't really explain it, but the silence around us felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. Even the birds, which usually make trails feel alive, were quiet. I mentioned it to Jake, but he just laughed and said I was imagining things. When we finally got to the lake, the first thing that caught our attention was an abandoned tent on the opposite shore. It was strange because the trail to the lake wasn't easy, and it didn't seem like the kind of place someone would just leave their stuff behind. We got curious and decided to check it out before setting up our camp. The tent was open with a few things scattered around: a broken flashlight, a single shoe, and what looked like a partially burned sleeping bag. What really gave us chills, though, was a backpack we found a few feet from the tent. It was ripped open and stained with what looked like dried blood. Jake tried to argue it could be paint or mud, but I knew it wasn't. That discovery cast a weird shadow over everything, but we'd already walked so far that we decided to stay anyway. We set up our camp a bit further away from that tent. It was impossible to ignore how uncomfortable it made us, but we didn't want to hike all the way back to the main trail. At least the lake was beautiful. The water was so still, it looked like a mirror, reflecting the trees around it, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It was like the forest had eyes glued to us. Jake tried to act normal. He lit the fire and started preparing something to eat. But I noticed him glancing over his shoulder now and then. I couldn't relax either, as if there was something in the air that just wasn't right. When it got completely dark, the silence became suffocating. No crickets, no sound of water lapping the shore. Just the crackling fire and the occasional rustle of trees far off. It was late, and we were trying to sleep in the tent when we heard footsteps. They weren't fast or loud, but you could clearly hear someone or something walking around the campsite. Jake whispered to ask if I'd heard it too, and I just nodded in the dark, my heart pounding. We grabbed our flashlights and stepped out of the tent, expecting to find an animal or maybe even another camper. But there was no one there. The fire was still burning low, and the ground around us looked untouched. Even so, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. Suddenly, a branch snapped nearby, and when I pointed my flashlight in that direction, it illuminated nothing. It was like something was playing with us, hiding in the shadows, taunting us. After that noise, Jake started saying we should leave, but it was nearly impossible to hike back down the trail in the dark without getting lost or injured. We decided to try and ignore it, going back to the tent, but the idea of sleeping after that felt ridiculous. Every tiny noise outside seemed magnified, and even when we tried to stay still, we could hear the faint shuffle of footsteps on the ground. This time, it sounded closer. The worst part was that the sounds didn't seem to come from one direction. They circled around us, back and forth, like whoever, or whatever, was out there was studying us. At one point, I thought I heard breathing, low and uneven, but when I unzipped the tent to check, all I saw was the dark forest. When the wind picked up, I thought it would be a relief. At least it would break the eerie silence. But that's when things got even weirder. The wind brought a horrible smell, metallic and rotten, like spoiled meat. It was so strong we had to cover our faces with our shirts, but it felt like the smell was sticking to the air around us. Then, the fire, which should have been dying out, suddenly flared up, as if someone had thrown more wood or some kind of fuel onto it. But we hadn't left the tent since earlier. Jake started mumbling that this wasn't normal, that something was seriously wrong. I couldn't answer. I just stared at those flames that seemed unnaturally high, lighting up the trees like they were alive. While I stared at the fire, I heard a sharp sound coming from the water, like something being dragged along the shore. Jake grabbed my arm so hard it almost hurt, pointing toward the noise. The firelight partially illuminated the shore, but it was impossible to see what was there. We grabbed our flashlights again and pointed them toward the lake, but the water was completely still, reflective like a mirror, and nothing was moving. Yet the sound continued, getting closer and closer. It sounded like something wet, scraping against the rocks. Jake, nervous, started yelling for whoever or whatever it was to show itself, but there was no response, only that unsettling noise growing louder until it stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the forest itself had frozen in time. And then, almost without warning, a shadow moved near the water's edge. It wasn't a person, I'm sure of that. It was low to the ground but long, and its movement was irregular, almost mechanical. Jake turned off his flashlight immediately, like that would protect us, but I couldn't look away. I don't know if it was the firelight or the moon, but it looked like whatever it was, it glistened, as if covered in something wet. When I tried to say something, no sound came out of my mouth. Jake grabbed my arm, whispering that we needed to get out of there, but my legs felt frozen. That rotten smell hit us again, even stronger this time, and in that moment, I knew if we stayed any longer, something terrible would happen. Jake practically dragged me back to the tent, and as terrifying as it was, I knew he was right. We couldn't just stand there. While we tried to gather our things, I heard a scraping sound on the tent fabric. It was soft, but enough to make my breathing stop. I looked at Jake, and he was pale, his hands shaking as he held his backpack. We decided not to waste time packing everything. We'd grab the essentials and leave as quickly as possible. But as soon as we took our first step outside, the sound came back, louder and closer. This time, it was coming from all around us, like the forest itself was alive. Jake pointed his flashlight toward the trees, but it was as if the light was swallowed by the darkness. There was nothing there, or at least nothing we could see. We ran. I don't know where the courage came from, but we ran like our lives depended on it, and honestly, I think they did. The trail wasn't easy to follow in the dark, and at one point, I'm pretty sure we got lost. I could hear Jake breathing heavily behind me, but even as we ran, I felt like something was right there, just inches from us. At one point, I glanced over my shoulder, and I swear I saw something glowing between the trees. It wasn't a normal light. It pulsed like it was breathing. I don't know what it was, but it was enough to make me run faster. When we finally saw an opening in the forest, we sprinted toward it without even thinking. We didn't look back. All we wanted was to get as far away as possible. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, we were far from the lake, but still in the middle of the forest. The silence was still unsettling, heavy, and the rotten smell still seemed to linger, though weaker now. Jake collapsed on the ground, clutching his chest as if trying to calm himself, but I couldn't stop scanning the shadows between the trees. Every movement, every sound made my heart race. We decided there was no waiting until morning. We'd keep walking, even without knowing exactly where we were going, as long as it was away from that place. The problem was, with every step, it felt like the forest was closing in on us, more oppressive. Somehow, it felt like we were walking in circles. Jake started panicking, saying we'd never get out. Then we heard it again. Footsteps. But this time they were fast, like something running toward us. It couldn't have been an animal. The sound was too steady, too deliberate. Jake yelled that we should split up, as if that would help, and he ran to the right while I went left, almost tripping on every root and rock in my way. The noise kept following, like it was chasing us both at the same time. At one point, I saw it again, or at least I think I did. It was a low, glistening silhouette moving quickly between the trees, almost gliding. By now, I was crying, convinced I wouldn't make it out alive. I kept running, ignoring the pain in my legs and the terror that felt like it was crushing me. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the forest started to thin out, and I finally saw what looked like the start of the trail we'd used to get there. Jake appeared a few moments later, covered in scratches and sweating like he'd just woken up from a nightmare. We didn't say a word to each other, just kept walking until we reached the trailhead where we'd parked the car. Once we got inside and locked the doors, it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. Jake, who had always been the braver of the two of us, looked at me and simply said, "Never again." I didn't respond, but I knew he was right. We'd never go back there. To this day, I've tried to make sense of what happened that night. I don't know what that thing at the lake was, or why we felt like we were being hunted. I've read about places with strange energy, where unexplainable things happen, but nothing I've come across matches exactly what we experienced. I still get chills when I think about the smell, the silence, and the way that thing moved. I haven't told anyone about this besides you all here. I'm not even sure if you'll believe me, but I needed to get it out of my head. All I know is that since that night, I can't step into a forest without feeling like I'm being watched. I'm not the kind of person who believes in supernatural things, you know? I've always been skeptical, the type that thinks everything has a logical explanation. But what happened on that trail? I still can't explain it, and just thinking about it gives me chills. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, just me and my college friends enjoying a camping trip far from the city. We picked a really remote spot in the middle of a forest that almost no one knew about because we wanted something different. The trail was long, about 4 hours of hiking, and you could only get there on foot. The plan was simple: set up our tents, light a campfire, and enjoy the silence. No phone signal, no one around. At least, that's what we thought. It was almost dusk when we saw a strange light in the distance, far between the trees. At first, no one thought much of it. We figured it might be another group camping nearby, maybe using flashlights or even a drone. We joked about the coincidence of having neighbors in such an isolated place, but kept walking. But as we got closer to the spot we wanted to camp, the light began to move. Not in a normal way, you know? It didn't look like a flashlight waving or a drone flying. It floated slowly, and the weirdest part, it made no sound. No wind, no cracking branches, nothing. Just silence, and that light getting closer and closer. That's when we all started to feel uneasy. When we realized the light was heading straight toward us, we all stopped. It was like no one wanted to admit that it was making us uncomfortable, but you could feel it in the air. The silence was heavy, and even the sound of our footsteps felt out of place. I tried to make a joke to lighten the mood, something about aliens in the forest, but no one laughed. The worst part was that you couldn't stop looking at it. It was too bright, but not like a regular light. It was cold, you know? It didn't give off heat or flicker. It was a steady glow, almost hypnotizing. We stood there staring until someone, probably Chris, suggested it might be better to pick up the pace and get to our campsite quickly. But the more we walked, the more it felt like the light was following us. And it wasn't just in our heads, I swear. It didn't stay in one spot like it was observing from a distance. It moved, and fast. Sometimes it disappeared for a second behind a tree, but then reappeared. We started arguing. Some of us wanted to turn back to the main trail, while others thought it was silly to worry. We decided to set up camp anyway, because I don't know, it seemed ridiculous to leave everything behind because of a light. That's when things really started going wrong. As we stopped to grab our flashlights and set up the tents, we noticed that nothing was working properly. The phones were already out of signal, as expected, but now they wouldn't even turn on. The flashlights flickered, the GPS shut off on its own, and even Kyle's digital watch had stopped. Things got serious when we realized it wasn't just the equipment failing. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly, like the air around us was thicker. I can't fully explain it, but it felt like we were being swallowed by something. Even the sounds were gone. You couldn't hear the crickets, the birds, or any of the usual forest noises. Just the wind passing through the trees and the light, which now seemed closer than ever. It didn't blink, but it pulsed, like it was alive. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but it was clear everyone was terrified. We tried to set up the tents as quickly as possible, but it was almost impossible with the flashlights flickering and everyone on edge. Every snapping twig or shadow felt like a signal that something was about to happen. When we finally managed to throw together a makeshift shelter, the light stopped. Literally. It stayed about 20 meters away, almost as if it were watching us. That just made things worse. Emily started crying quietly, and Mike paced back and forth, saying this had to be some kind of prank or experiment. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't. It was too strange. I tried to convince everyone to stay together and wait until morning, but the tension was unbearable. Then the light started moving again, this time in a circle around the campsite. The light began to circle us, always keeping the same distance. It felt like it was studying us in a way none of us could understand. Every time it moved, the sense of dread grew stronger. Emily kept crying, and I could feel my own heart pounding like it was about to burst. Chris was the first to snap. He picked up a rock and threw it at the light, shouting something like, "Leave us alone!" The rock flew through the air and hit the ground, but it didn't make a sound. No impact, no echo. The light, however, stopped immediately, as if it had heard him. It stayed completely still while we all stared at each other, trying to process what was happening. Then, without warning, it started coming toward us. Not quickly, but steadily, like it knew exactly what it was doing. We all instinctively stepped back, but there was nowhere to go. The campsite was in a clearing surrounded by dense trees, and running blindly into the dark seemed even more dangerous. Mike tried to turn on his flashlight again, but it flickered once and died for good. At that point, I didn't know what was worse, staying there and waiting or trying to run without being able to see. The light stopped just a few feet away from us, flooding the area with an otherworldly glow. You couldn't see anything but that intense light, like it had erased everything else. That's when things truly got terrifying. The light seemed to swallow us, leaving everything else in total darkness. I could feel the ground beneath my feet and the weight of my backpack, but it was like my sense of space was vanishing. You couldn't tell where the trees were, where the sky started, or where the earth ended. Mike, who had always been the skeptic, started mumbling things I couldn't understand, like he was praying or trying to convince himself it wasn't real. Then, out of nowhere, the light did something none of us expected. It blinked, so briefly that it was hard to process, and when it returned, it was even brighter, almost blinding. That's when Chris screamed. Not a normal scream, but something full of terror, like he was seeing something we couldn't. The strangest part is that when I looked where he was pointing, I saw nothing but the light. But he kept insisting, panicking, saying there was something there, something inside that glow. I tried to pull him back to calm him down, but he broke free and ran toward the trees. We yelled for him to come back, but it was like he couldn't hear us. Within seconds, he disappeared into the darkness. Then, the light simply turned off, like someone had flipped a switch. We were left in complete darkness, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Emily collapsed to the ground, sobbing, and Mike kept saying we needed to get out of there. But where? The GPS was dead, the flashlights didn't work, and the trail was impossible to find without light. It was like we were trapped. We stayed still for a few minutes, maybe longer, trying to pull ourselves together. Chris didn't come back, and the silence was deafening. The absence of the light should have been a relief, but somehow it made everything even more terrifying. Without it, it felt like something bigger and more unknown was watching us, hidden in the darkness. Finally, we decided to look for Chris. It didn't make sense to stay there, and standing still only made the panic worse. We used our phones as weak sources of light, even though the batteries were almost dead. They barely lit up our own feet, but it was all we had. We started walking in the direction Chris had run, calling his name softly, almost as if we were afraid of making too much noise. After a few minutes, we saw something strange on the ground ahead, Chris's backpack. It was lying there, open, with his things scattered around, but there was no sign of him, no footprints, no indication he'd passed through. Emily started panicking again, and Mike grabbed her arm to keep her from completely breaking down. That's when, deep in the woods, we saw the light again. But this time, it was farther away, almost like it was inviting us to follow. I don't know if it was fear or instinct, but at that moment, we decided to turn back. We ran in the opposite direction, not even sure if we were still on the trail. All I could think was, we need to get out of here. We stayed still for a few minutes, maybe longer, trying to pull ourselves together. Chris didn't come back, and the silence was deafening. The absence of the light should have been a relief, but somehow it made everything even more terrifying. Without it, it felt like something bigger and more unknown was watching us, hidden in the darkness. Finally, we decided to look for Chris. It didn't make sense to stay there, and standing still only made the panic worse. We used our phones as weak sources of light, even though the batteries were almost dead. They barely lit up our own feet, but it was all we had. We started walking in the direction Chris had run, calling his name softly, almost as if we were afraid of making too much noise. After a few minutes, we saw something strange on the ground ahead, Chris's backpack. It was lying there, open, with his things scattered around, but there was no sign of him, no footprints, no indication he'd passed through. Emily started panicking again, and Mike grabbed her arm to keep her from completely breaking down. That's when, deep in the woods, we saw the light again. But this time, it was farther away, almost like it was inviting us to follow. I don't know if it was fear or instinct, but at that moment, we decided to turn back. We ran in the opposite direction, not even sure if we were still on the trail. All I could think was, we need to get out of here. We ran for what felt like hours, tripping over roots and stumbling in the dark. Every sound seemed amplified, the rustling leaves, our heavy breathing, the snapping branches underfoot. But we never stopped to look back. The forest felt endless, and even though we had no light to guide us, somehow we eventually found the main trail. I don't know how. It was like we just stumbled onto it. None of us said a word. We just kept walking until we saw the faint glow of dawn breaking through the trees. When we finally reached the parking lot where we had left the car, the relief was overwhelming. But Chris was still missing. His car was there, his keys, his gear, all untouched. And we had no idea how to explain what had happened. We went to the authorities, of course. Search parties were organized, and they combed through the forest for days. But there was no trace of him, not a single clue. When we told them about the light, they looked at us like we were crazy. They said it was probably a drone or maybe some kind of natural phenomenon, but I know what I saw. We all do. The light wasn't natural, and whatever it was, it wanted something from us. To this day, I can't hike. I can't even look at a forest without feeling that same sense of dread. And Chris? He's still missing. No remains, no sightings, nothing. Just gone. I wish I could tell you we found an explanation or some kind of closure, but we didn't. That night still haunts me. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can see that same light glowing outside my window. And every time, I wonder, what if it followed us back? I always thought camping in isolated places was the perfect way to disconnect from the world, you know? Just us, nature, and absolute silence. So, when my friend Jack found that remote campground online, it seemed perfect. It was far from any town, in the middle of a dense forest. And for some reason, no one had rented it in months. Maybe it was because of the price, which was a bit steep, but splitting it among 5 people made it affordable. We arrived early Saturday afternoon, all excited about the weekend ahead. The place was almost too good to be true. Simple cabins, a central fire pit, and that feeling of being completely alone in the world. Everything seemed great, at least for the first few hours. We unpacked, made a barbecue, and laughed over old stories as the afternoon faded. The trouble began as the sun was setting. It was Emily who noticed first. She was taking pictures of the landscape and suddenly froze, with this weird look on her face that sent a chill down my spine. When I asked her what was wrong, she just pointed. On top of a hill, about 200 yards away, there was a figure standing still. It was hard to tell if it was a man or a woman, but they were motionless, as if watching us. They didn't appear to have a weapon or anything, but the way they stood there, not moving, was unsettling. We laughed it off at first, saying it was probably just a hiker or something, but the unease was palpable. After a few minutes, the figure simply turned and disappeared behind the hill. We figured it was just a curious passerby and tried to move on. Even as we sat around the fire joking, you could feel the tension in the air. Everyone kept glancing over their shoulders, trying to play it cool. That lingering feeling of being watched just wouldn't go away. We decided to ignore it and enjoy the night. Around 11 p.m., we started to feel tired and began getting ready for bed. Emily and Sarah went to one of the cabins, while Jack, Mike, and I stayed in the other. It was close to midnight when we heard footsteps outside. Not loud, but enough to notice the crunching of leaves, like someone walking slowly around the cabin. Jack grabbed a flashlight and opened the door to check. Of course, there was no one outside, but he mentioned how weirdly quiet it was, like the wind and nighttime sounds had stopped altogether. We were about to close the door and forget about it when Mike spotted something strange. On the ground, right in front of the cabin, there was a crumpled piece of paper. It looked old, almost like it had been torn out of an old notebook, and it was scribbled with strange symbols. In the middle of them, there was one chilling word scrawled in shaky letters: leave. That paper sent shivers down everyone's spine. Jack tried to make a joke to lighten the mood, but you could see he was just as uneasy as the rest of us. Who would leave something like that in the middle of the night, and why? We decided not to tell the girls right away to avoid scaring them, but we all agreed to stay alert for anything unusual. That night, though, the atmosphere only got worse. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps, like someone running outside. I quickly got up, trying not to make a noise, and went to the window. I couldn't see anything except the trees and the faint glow of the dying fire. Before I could go back to bed, I heard something louder. 3 sharp knocks on the door. In that moment, Mike woke up too and whispered to ask if I heard it. I nodded, frozen. After a few seconds of dead silence, Jack, who had also woken up, grabbed a kitchen knife we'd brought along and whispered that he was going to open the door. Everything in me screamed for him not to, but he was already determined. When he opened it, all we found was the cold wind rushing in and the darkness outside. No one was there, but you could feel that something was off. Very off. No one could sleep after that. We stayed up until dawn, every little sound in the forest making us jumpy. When the sun finally came up, we told Emily and Sarah everything. They were scared, of course, but tried to be rational. Emily suggested it could have been a local messing with us, trying to scare us off. It sounded plausible enough, but none of us really believed it. We decided to climb the hill where we'd seen the figure the day before, just to see if we could find anything that explained what was going on. Climbing the hill was harder than it looked. The ground was covered in dry branches that snapped underfoot, making us feel exposed. When we got to the top, there wasn't anything obvious, but again, it was Emily who noticed something strange. In the middle of a small clearing between the trees, there were marks on the ground, like something heavy had been dragged around. The marks formed a nearly perfect circle, and around it were more of those strange symbols scratched into the dirt. At the center of the circle was another piece of paper with the same word, leave. Finding that second paper was like a punch to the gut. It was impossible to deny that this was directed at us, but by who and why? Mike tried to pick up the paper, but Emily screamed at him not to touch it. "You don't know what it is," she said, her voice shaking, and honestly, none of us wanted to find out. We rushed down the hill as fast as we could, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. It was like the entire forest had eyes on us. When we got back to the campsite, we agreed to pack up and leave. Staying there didn't make any sense after what we'd seen. As we loaded everything into the car, the tension kept building. That's when we noticed something even more unsettling. The ashes from the fire pit we'd extinguished the night before had been arranged into a strange shape, like a triangle with the center burned out. None of us had done that. The worst part? No one had seen or heard anything during the night. It was like the whole place was conspiring to get us to leave. When we finally got into the car and started driving, the silence was almost suffocating. No one said a word, but we all knew something was watching us as we left. As the car moved down the dirt road, The air inside felt heavy, like something unseen was following us. I don't know if it was my imagination, but I swear I saw a quick movement between the trees in the rearview mirror. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make things worse. After about 20 minutes of driving, Jack, who was at the wheel, suddenly stopped. "There's something on the road," he said, pointing. It was hard to see clearly because of the fog, but there was a figure standing completely still in the middle of the path. We all sat in silence, trying to process what we were seeing. Jack honked, but the figure didn't move. It looked like the same one we had seen on the hill the day before. Only now it was much closer, almost within reach of the headlights. "Just drive around it," someone shouted, but before Jack could react, the figure simply vanished. It didn't walk away, didn't run. It just disappeared, like it had never been there. The silence in the car was broken only by the hum of the engine as Jack hit the gas and sped down the road. None of us looked back. When we finally reached the main road, the relief was almost overwhelming. It felt like we'd left it all behind, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. I've never been a superstitious person, but after what happened that weekend, something in me changed. It was supposed to be a normal hike with some coworkers, a way to unwind and escape the office routine. The plan was simple: take a well-known trail in a national park and camp near a river. The morning started out fine, full of laughter, photos, and that camaraderie vibe. But by mid-afternoon, something went wrong. We followed what seemed like a natural detour from the main trail, nothing strange at first glance. But without realizing it, we kept veering further off track. By the time we noticed, we were in a place none of us recognized, surrounded by trees so dense you could barely see the sky. That's when we found the cabin. It was old, almost rotting, with loose planks and a door that looked ready to collapse. But something about it felt off. Despite its abandoned look, it didn't feel completely lifeless. A few details caught our attention. There were fresh footprints in the dirt outside, and one of the windows was slightly ajar, like someone had recently gone through it. Curiosity got the better of us. We decided to take a quick look, thinking it might be one of those historical cabins you sometimes find forgotten in the woods. It wasn't. The smell of mold and old wood was overwhelming, but what really unnerved us were the items inside. They weren't old like the cabin. Everything was recent: a backpack with a half-full thermos, a jacket hanging on a chair, and most disturbingly, a driver's license lying on the floor. It belonged to someone we knew had gone missing in the area months ago. That driver's license froze us in place. One of my coworkers, Jake, picked it up and examined it. "This isn't a joke, right?" he asked, but no one responded. All I could think about was the news report I had seen about the disappearance of the man who owned that license. He was in his 30s and had been missing for nearly 4 months. While Jake tucked the license into his backpack, the rest of us began to explore the cabin. The atmosphere was unbearable. The place looked small from the outside, but inside, there were hallways that stretched longer than they should have. We split up, opening doors and trying to figure out what this place was. Then I saw something that made my skin crawl: a bed with clean sheets, as if someone had just slept there. Before I could say anything, we heard the first noise. It was a creak, like something heavy shifting upstairs. I don't remember who said it, but someone suggested we leave immediately. The problem was that not everyone was in the same room. We started calling for each other, yelling names and trying not to sound panicked, but the responses were muffled, like the cabin itself was swallowing the sound. The tension was building fast. Then Emily, who had gone upstairs, came running down, pale as a ghost. She could only manage one sentence: "There's something upstairs. Something alive." Emily's reaction was the breaking point for our panic. We all rushed to the door, but for some reason, it wouldn't budge. It wasn't locked, just stuck, like the wood had swollen or something. While Jake tried to force it open with his shoulder, we started hearing noises from all around us. They weren't footsteps, but they also didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It was like scratching, but deep, accompanied by an almost metallic sound that echoed through the walls. I can't even tell where it was coming from. It felt like it was everywhere. The strangest part was how the noise seemed to echo inside my head, amplifying the fear. When we finally managed to force the door open, the relief was short-lived. Outside, it was already dark, and the forest, which had seemed normal earlier, now felt different. The trees leaned in strange ways, almost as if they were moving, and a thick fog covered the ground, muffling our steps. Emily kept insisting that we should head straight back to the main trail, but the problem was, no one could agree on which direction to go. The cabin didn't seem to be in the same place anymore. When we looked back, it was as if it had shifted, or maybe the surroundings had changed. That's when someone screamed. I don't remember who. But it was clear, something was following us. We ran without thinking, plunging deeper into the forest. Logic was gone, replaced by raw survival instinct. I remember hearing branches snapping behind us, but the sounds didn't match our footsteps. It was as if something else was moving through the trees, faster than any human could. Jake, who was leading the way, tripped on something and fell hard. When we turned to help him, he looked back at the darkness with an expression I'll never forget. "There are eyes! Back there!" he shouted, pointing toward the shadows. I didn't see anything right away, but the terror in his eyes was enough to make me believe him. Finally, we spotted a clearing that seemed like our only chance. The open space gave the illusion of safety for a few seconds, but before we could catch our breath, a sound pierced the air. It was like a whistle, but low and resonant, vibrating through the ground. Emily started screaming that it was a warning, that we needed to get out of there now, but no one knew which way to go. Then we noticed something even stranger. The fog in the clearing was moving against the wind, swirling and gathering as if it had a purpose. I swear I saw vaguely human shapes forming in the mist. I don't know if it was the fear playing tricks on me or if it was real, but those shapes in the fog began to move as if watching us. No one could speak. We were frozen. That's when Emily grabbed my arm and yelled for us to run, saying any direction was better than staying there. She was right. The clearing wasn't a refuge. It was a trap. We ran back into the forest, not even caring which way we went. The feeling of being chased was constant. It wasn't just the sounds. It was something deeper, like a presence following us inside our own heads. After what felt like hours, we saw lights in the distance. They weren't flashlights or anything human, but they didn't seem natural either. They were faint, greenish, pulsing between the trees. Jake started saying we shouldn't go near them, but Emily insisted it might be our only way out. Out of desperation more than anything, we moved toward the lights. But as we got closer, it became clear they weren't leading to safety. The lights surrounded what looked like a hole in the ground, a pit or a grave, with strange markings all around it. None of us had the courage to get any closer. That's when Jake started saying he could hear voices. Jake was pale, like all the blood had drained from his face. He was holding his head, muttering that the voices were getting louder, as if they were speaking directly to him. I couldn't hear anything, but the look on his face was terrifying. Emily tried to pull him away from the pit, but he seemed frozen, his eyes fixed on the lights. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The ground around the hole was vibrating. It was faint but unmistakable, like something beneath us was alive. It was wrong, deeply, terrifyingly wrong. When we finally managed to drag Jake away, it was like snapping him out of a trance. He looked at us with wide eyes and started yelling that we needed to leave immediately, that they were coming. There was no time to argue. We ran in the opposite direction as fast as we could, ignoring the branches tearing at our arms and the roots trying to trip us. The lights stayed behind, but the sound didn't. It was growing, getting louder, closer. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was pressure, like the air itself was crushing us. I knew if we stopped, it would all be over. Then, suddenly, the sound stopped. It wasn't a relief, it was worse. The silence was absolute, as if the entire world had stopped. Even our breathing felt muted, unnatural. Emily glanced back, and I saw her face go pale with terror. When I turned to look too, I wished I hadn't. There, between the trees, the lights were back, but this time they were moving closer, floating like they were hunting us. And in the middle of them, I swear I saw something. A tall, distorted silhouette that didn't belong in this world. That's when we realized the forest was leading us back to the cabin. No matter which way we ran, everything seemed to bend around us, pushing us toward the same spot. When we finally saw the cabin again, we all stopped, out of breath and in shock. The cabin was different now. The windows were glowing like there was a party inside, but there was no music, only that same low, haunting whistle that had followed us. Emily started crying, saying she wouldn't go back in, but the lights behind us were so close we had no choice. It was either the cabin or face whatever was coming through the forest. Stepping back into the cabin felt like crossing into another world. The interior was no longer the same. It was much larger now, with walls that seemed to pulse like they were alive. The smell of mold was gone, replaced by something metallic, almost like blood. Everything we'd seen before, the backpack, the jacket, the ID, was gone, as if it had never been there. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. We were trapped. Jake started pacing in circles, muttering words we couldn't understand, while Emily curled up in a corner, trembling. I was just trying to figure out how to get out, but the cabin seemed to shift every second. Hallways appeared where walls had been, and doors blinked in and out of existence like a living maze. The sound was the worst part. That low whistle was back, but now it was coming from inside the cabin, echoing through the halls. That's when we realized we weren't alone. The shadow Jake had seen in the forest was now here, moving through the hallways, playing with us. I don't know how to describe what we saw. It wasn't human or animal or anything I've ever seen before. It was tall and thin, but its shape was distorted, like it didn't belong in our world. The way it moved was wrong, completely silent, but each step felt like it vibrated inside my head. Jake screamed for us to run, but where could we go? Every hallway led back to the same spot, like we were trapped in a living nightmare. Emily started praying, her voice shaking, while the whistle grew louder, more oppressive. Then suddenly, the lights in the cabin went out completely. I can't explain what happened, but it felt like the ground disappeared beneath us for a moment, like we were falling without moving. Everything went silent. Then, in the blink of an eye, the door was open again. Without thinking, we bolted outside, stumbling over roots and branches, just trying to get as far away as possible. When we finally stopped, we were back on the main trail. The cabin? It was gone. We looked back, but there was nothing, just trees. No sign of where we had been. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. When we finally found our way back, no one said a word. Emily cried quietly, and Jake looked like he was in shock, staring at the ground as if trying to erase everything from his memory. We decided not to tell anyone, not even the police. Who would believe us? All I know is that I've had nightmares ever since. Dreams of that place, of those lights, and of that thing watching us. Sometimes I wake up feeling like I'm still in that cabin, like I never really left. The strangest part came weeks later. I looked up information about the person whose driver's license we had found. He was still listed as missing, but a new report said others had vanished in the same area since then. One photo of a missing young man caught my eye. He was wearing a jacket that looked exactly like the one we had seen hanging in the cabin. Since that day, I've never set foot in a forest again. And if you ever stumble across a cabin in the middle of nowhere, don't go inside. Some doors should never be opened.